Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not Your Average Goat. This is a show that celebrates all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, while creating a space for authentic and vulnerable conversations that hopefully you find to be meaningful and relatable. Through these conversations, my guests and I hope to have an impact on dismantling deeply ingrained stigma and prejudice.
Chad, I think you're the first fellow podcaster I've actually brought on the show to interview, which is so cool for me.
Yay.
I know you as a podcaster interact probably with more fellow podcasters than I do, but I do think it is really nice because I think we both really value just the quality of a conversation and really trying to share our stories with other people. So I'm really looking forward to just diving into our chat.
Yeah, me too. I really do enjoy talking with other podcast hosts, and I've had several on. It's just, for me, it's all about supporting each other because we're all in the same kind of realm and we're all kind of trying to do the same thing. It's just bring more awareness. So I always love collaborating with my fellow podcast host.
Me too. And I remember the way we actually became acquainted is because we were both part of a Facebook group for blind business owners and enthusiasts. And I remember I saw a post that you put on asking for recommendations for how to go about getting your logo put on some of your merchandise. And I remember I had already seen someone respond with what I was initially going to respond. I was like, yes, second Vista print, because it is so cost effective. It's so easy to use, small business friendly. And I remember I was like, hey, by the way, like, what is your podcast? Like, I was just like immediately excited and intrigued just to learn about what your show was about, because I hadn't really met any other podcasters through the Facebook group and had also never really come to be acquainted with any fellow blind podcasters either. What is your primary show again?
So my primary one is the Unsighted Radio. It was once called Hindsight is 20/200. The joke there being, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but if you're blind, 2200, obviously kind of the benchmark for legally being blind. So it was more so of a punny show. But then I kind of wanted to kind of make my own LLC, which nowadays is actually a really good thing. So I was just thinking of a name for an LLC, and my dad recommended Unsighted, and I liked the idea of the name. So then when I was thinking of, well, if I ever do like an actual business, I'd like the podcast to kind of be the official podcast of whatever business I end up creating. So I made it the Unsighted Radio.
I love the name too. And I kind of had similar thoughts too when I was trying to actually create my website and trying to think more long term. So I actually purchased a .org domain extension versus a .com, just in case I did decide to start a nonprofit, which is still on the table. So my website is actually notyouraveragegoat.org versus .com. So I had kind of like similar considerations when I was trying to pick my name and pick what type of website domain I wanted to go with. So Chad, I like to start off my podcast by having my guest kind of take a little, travel back into time. And so would love to know for you, reflecting on young Chad, so thinking like 7, 8 years old, tell me about your personality. Like, what were you interested in? Like, how are you different from today?
That's a funny question because there's a lot about me at that age that I'm the same, but then there's a lot of me that I'm very different. So 7 and 8, that if we're going with 7, that would have been at least 4 years before I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa. So I along with my sister, because my sister and I are 14 months apart. So when I was 11 and she was 10, we were both diagnosed the same day with autosomal recessive retinitis pigmentosa. And at that point, I would say I was very immature, very, no pun intended, but I guess pun intended, blind to the world, I didn't really understand the complexities of a visual disability and how that would affect me growing up, especially with it being a progressive disease. I just thought, well, I've always been in glasses, so it doesn't change anything that I've already, been experiencing since like 2, because my mom said the first time I ever got put in glasses was around 2, 3 years old. So it's like, okay, I've always been in glasses. I've always kind of had bad vision. Doesn't change anything. I was a nerd. I still am a nerd. I've always loved comics. I've always loved cartoons. I've always loved video games. So that's always been something that's been a very big passion for me. And nowadays, with the work that I'm doing, it's kind of cool to be able to keep those passions. I guess that's one thing like I would tell like young me is like, hey, you don't have to give up loving cartoons and video games. You can actually find a career path with those things later in life. But I was just very immature. I didn't understand the complexities of vision loss. At that point in time, I thought being blind, the word blind meant you can't see anything at all. So I thought, like, if I do go blind, then that means I won't be able to see at all. Obviously, now knowing that that's not true, even if you are, labeled blind with a diagnosis, you still can have usable vision. And that, opens up a big conversation that I'm even having with family members, trying to let them know is like, just because I say I'm blind doesn't mean that I can't see, but we'll leave that for if you want to talk about that later. But the diagnosis really didn't change anything until I was around 16. So yeah, for the most part, I was just a very immature, wacky, fun-loving kid. And then once I got older, I started going through a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. So I lost a lot of that wackiness. I lost a lot of that fun-loving nature. Kind of mellowed out and became reclusive and kind of just started to shy away from the world.
I think that we all have circumstances, good and maybe not so good, that change us, change our demeanor throughout life. It's always hard, though, to think about your younger self and just how carefree you were and oblivious. I think oblivious is great. They say, what is it? Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
And I think that is great because it truly is. I think about being a child and not understanding that being an adult means having to have bills. Like, if I could go back, just get rid of all my bills. Like where does my paycheck even go?
My mom, she's on like the Insta stories all the time.
Yeah.
And she saw like this one says, what's your best memory or your favorite thing of when you were a kid? And then the response is not having to pay bills.
Yeah.
Not having to be an adult.
Exactly. And I'm like, hey, where did summer vacations go? Like, why can't I just take off for 3 months?
Yeah. Christmas vacations.
Yeah. I was like, what? I have to rack up PTO days before I can take a vacation? What is this nonsense? So you mentioned having a sister. Can you tell me more about like your family life and home life?
My mom and dad are phenomenal. I mean, I guess any kid who has a good relationship with their parents will, echo that. Oh, I love my mom, my dad. They're the best parents in the world. So happy that they're my parents, the cliches, but it really is true when it comes to me. My mom and dad really raised my sister and I to be confident and independent. They tried their best to let us understand, yes, the vision disability, it sucks. I mean, let's just be honest about it. Any disability or chronic illness, it sucks. It sucks having it, and it sucks having to live with it. We all wish that we didn't have to, and maybe some of us eventually get to a point where we can actually find pride in our disability or chronic illness, but that takes a very long time, and it's a very up and down journey. So we can't all get there at a very fast pace. But my mom especially always tried to, the analogy she used is like, when it comes to depression, when it comes to feeling bad or hating our disability, it's like a road trip. We can park at the rest stop but we can't stay there forever. We got to keep going. We got to get back on the road and we got to move forward. We got to get back to the overall final destination. And I guess she just tried to show us like there's more to being disabled than sitting on a couch collecting a check and then just existing. You can do amazing things even with a chronic illness or a disability. And she just instilled that in us. And, my mother and my father are very strong people, personality wise, and their personal beliefs. And they just really try to let us know it's like, yeah, this sucks. You are absolutely able to cry about it, feel bad about it when you want to, but just don't let it try and consume you. And just try to rise above it. And obviously, I say all of this, and some people may be listening and they're not there yet. Don't worry. You don't have to feel like you have to be there or you need to get there. And maybe you don't want to get there. And that's for you to decide. But for me, the best thing that my parents ever did was kind of like tell me, it's okay to feel sad, but you've got to keep moving forward. Find something in your life. Try and find a way to make your disadvantage into your advantage and try to show the world that your disability is your ability and that it's a great ability. And maybe some people won't recognize it, but eventually there will be people that will recognize that. So to my mom and my dad, I always will thank them for instilling that sort of drive and just that mindset into me and into my sister.
Your parents sound very wise and very loving and supportive, which is so wonderful to hear because you don't always have that support. And you also don't always have parents who kind of understand and have that strong mindset. Because usually some parents, when they have a child with a disability, they're just as lost as the child is, and they don't even know the steps to take or how to encourage them.
They obviously faked it sometimes when they didn't have the answers. Obviously, they'll just try to, make it feel like everything's okay. There's nothing wrong. And that's just the parent in them. That's the protector in them. They don't want their kids to think, oh, we don't have this figured out because we're the parent. And, the perspective of the kid is, oh, my parents know everything. My dad and mom know the answers to everything. I can ask them a question and they know. So it's like, obviously there was times where they faked it until they made it. And just to speak on my sister, she's hands down my best friend. I think it's been very beneficial for the both of us to have grown up very close in age, both with RP. We have had two different journeys. I was always more forthcoming and upfront with my disability. I was like, okay, new teacher. I'm going to go up to them first day of class, tell them I'm blind. I can't see. I need this, this, and this. My sister, until fairly recently, I would say within the last 5-6 years, has become proud with her disability identity and is not afraid to no longer speak up for herself because of her blindness. But I think it was beneficial for us to be able to be there for each other. We've never really fought. We've never really had any sort of falling outs. And I think it's because, where we grew up, it was just her and I. No one else had a disability or chronic illness. It was really up to us to support each other. And I think understanding that, it really kind of got, it just, we never encountered any of it, like that sibling rivalry or animosity or trying to steal attention from our parents, because we both knew that we needed, balance in our lives because of this disability. So we really found a great harmony, and it continues to this day. We actually live together and in a house that we own together, and we are roommates, we are friends, and we are siblings.
That's amazing. I love that sibling dynamic. So you grew up, as a military brat. Can you tell me about that kind of lifestyle?
I feel weird saying this. It's like, I wish we would have moved around more, but I'm happy we didn't because I was able to make actual friends and keep them for an extended amount of time. I've heard stories of friends like, oh, we'd live here for like 3 months and then bam, somewhere else, 6 months, bam, somewhere else. So it's like never getting to set up roots and actually create relationships. So for my family and I, my dad served 26 years in the United States Air Force. I was born in 93. My sister was born in 94. And literally like 3-4 months after my sister was born, my family moved to Okinawa, Japan. We were stationed in Okinawa from 94 to 97. And then from 97 to 2000, we lived in Tucson, Arizona. My father got out of the Air Force around that time. At that time, we were kind of having a more clear picture of this vision, because my parents were starting to notice my vision was getting worse at an increasing pace that was pretty unnormal, and they had never experienced themselves. So they had concerns. They're like, okay, we've taken him to doctors, but no one really knows what's wrong with his vision. But obviously, they were concerned. And at that time, when they were becoming really more kind of conscious of my vision, my dad was asked to be stationed in South Korea. And at that point in his life, he made the decision that his family was more important to him than his military career. So in terms of, being actively deployed, he got out. He served the rest of his tenure in the U.S. military as reserve. And I will always have the most respect for my father. He just celebrated his birthday recently, and I love him to death. And I think it speaks to his love for his family, his love for his children, that he would notice that there's something wrong. He doesn't know what's wrong, but he understands that there's a greater health condition going on within his children, especially his oldest son. And that matters more to him than furthering his career actively in the military. So he got out, and then we moved back to Florida. My sister and I were both born in Florida. And then from 2000 onwards, I've been in Florida ever since.
Wow. Kudos to you. I spent about 6, 7 years in Florida. I was born in Maryland, moved to Florida when I was very, very young, and then moved back to Maryland at 7. And I'm now in Virginia. But Florida, for me, I love being able to go to the beach every day, or just, have a swimming pool in my backyard. But it's way too muggy for me. I can't handle it. And with this is probably not something that you're concerned about, or let me not assume this, but someone who has super curly hair, like my hair does not like muggy Florida weather. It just freezes up into like a big puff.
Obviously, I recently was in London, England for a disability conference, and the weather was amazing. And the second we landed back in the States, we're just like, humidity. Why did we come back to the humidity? We should have stayed in England.
I tell myself I'm going to move to California all the time, but then I see another story about a wildfire, and I'm like, okay, Do I want humidity or do I want wildfires and smoke?
Yeah, you just need that pool. Like you said, you've got to have a pool. You got to live somewhere where you either own a pool or on waterfront property or have a community pool, because you're going to get a lot of use out of that pool during the summer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have my eyes set on some waterfront property eventually when I can afford it. So at 10 years old, that's when your retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, diagnosis comes in. Can you tell me about, do you remember kind of the day that it happened or around the time it happened, and what was kind of going through your mind? What was going through your parents' minds?
This is something that I've, had to unpack and kind of really revisit. When I was working at Southeastern Guide Dogs, I did a lot of public speaking. And this is actually, I actually start my speech by recalling this day. And there's a lot of the day that I do not remember. I don't remember what I was doing, where I was at. All I really remember of that day is that my mother got a call on her phone. I don't know where we were, what we were doing, but I know it was the doctor because I had answered the phone for her. And obviously the doctor's like, hey, Dr. Gupta, he was my retinologist for a long, long time, over 20 years. And he was like, can I talk to your mom or your dad? So I was just like, hey, mom, the eye doctor, he's calling, he wants to talk to you. And then 2-3 minutes later, my mom's just sobbing uncontrollably. And I'm like, okay, this isn't normal. what's going on? And obviously, mom is just unconsolable. And we eventually go to the actual doctor's office, sit down, and he starts explaining, you know, both, because, my mom just didn't get, one diagnosis. She got two. She got both her kids at the same time, autosomal recessive retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, obviously for short. And that was a bad day for her. I know it was a bad day for her, because what parent wants to be told that their kids have a disability, a health condition that has no cure, and still to this day really does not have a cure, at least not for my genetic strand, has no cure. So for her, she was just devastated. But for me, obviously, again, we come back to the ignorance is bliss. I'm like 10, 11 years old. I'm like, okay, so what? This I don't care. I'm just gonna go play basketball and continue playing video games like I always have. I still have usable vision. I can still walk around on my own. I can still see fine. I don't care. This doesn't impact me, at least not now. And that's the thing I didn't understand about that day, is it's a progressive condition. And I didn't understand the word progressive. I didn't know that meant, oh, it's going to get worse. And there's no timeline for when it gets worse. I went from 10, 11 to around 15, 16, no change in my vision whatsoever. But once that dip happened, that first dip, I understood just from that first dip, wow, this is really going to change the way that I live my life forever until the day I die. So yeah, I just, the thing I really remember from that day, and it just, I can still hear it when I close my eyes and think about it, is just my mother sobbing. I just remember her crying because obviously she got at that time, the terrible news that both her kids had RP.
Yeah, and she probably felt kind of helpless in the moment too, knowing that there was nothing she could do to make your life, quote unquote, better. Before that, had you been going to ophthalmologist? Had you ever received any other diagnosis, or was it just, Chad doesn't have really great vision, we have to give him glasses?
Yeah, I mean, we have to think back to this being the mid to late 90s. The understanding of the retina is nowhere where it is at nowadays. I mean, the understanding of the retina, there's so much study that goes into the retina, just specifically the retina. Just so much research that has been done to understand not only, my and your disease, but other inherited retinal disorders. So at this point, they're just like, yeah, we don't really know what's going on. Obviously, the first time we really went to a eye doctor was in Japan. And at that time, I just, I think there was obviously, I don't mean any offense when I say this, but I think there might have been quite a big gap between their understanding and then, say like the Western world's understanding of the retina. I have no proof of that. I just, kind of get a sense that they really just did not know what they were, supposed to see. And once we moved back to the States and we were living in Tucson for a while, we did go to another ophthalmologist. They thought I had Leber's congenital amaurosis, which it does present very similarly, but obviously it's not the same disease. But they thought, okay, maybe some LCA, but we're not still. We can't truly give you a diagnosis because we don't know for sure if there's actually anything wrong with your son's eyes or his optic nerves. And it wasn't until 10, 11. And, obviously looking back now, it's like, oh, it was always RP. It was always RP. It had to be. There's nothing else that I could be. But I think it's just with the understanding of the eye back in those days, the research that was being done on the retina. And also, I think, unfortunately, I just had to progress enough to where it presented clearly to one of my eye doctors, Dr. Redmond, and it was just a routine ophthalmology appointment. and he saw something in the retina that he was very concerned about. So he told us, okay, I want you to go to Dr. Gupta, who is a phenomenal retinologist. He is, I have the most respect for him. I think he is truly one of the greatest minds when it comes to understanding the retina, especially RP. So, in touch with all the studies that are going on currently with the clinical trials and everything. But he was like, yeah, definitely RP, definitely RP. And that was around 2004, 2005 when we got that diagnosis.
So for listeners who don't know about myself, so I also have RP2, was born with it. My condition has not been progressive, and I am beyond grateful that that has been my experience. But from the age of like 6 months until about 10 years old. So, and I'm also like a few years older than you, but I was literally going to Johns Hopkins University and seeing their ophthalmologist, like probably the best place I could have gone in the world in the 90s. And they told my mom that I had macular degeneration. So that's what I thought I had for the longest time. And macular degeneration, for those who are not aware, is an eye condition that impacts older populations.
Yeah, routinely is more seen in older, 40 plus. So it's just interesting. It's like, oh, you got a 6 month baby here with macular degeneration.
Exactly. And so I went through my entire life until I was about 25. I was deciding to start my master's program at that time. I needed to get a document basically stating that, yes, I do have a visual impairment so that I can get necessary accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to go to a new ophthalmologist, and he was like, okay, like, what is your condition? I said, macular degeneration. And he was like, no, that can't be it. Yeah. So he like ran the test and everything. And afterward, he tells me, he was like, you do not have macular degeneration, and kind of explained like what that condition is. He was like, what you have is retinitis pigmentosa. And then, I go home. My husband, is a big researcher, like he loves learning about new things. And as soon as he hears about a new thing, like he just dives like headfirst into it and just like research the heck out of it.
Sounds like my dad.
So of course we go home. Well, we weren't married at the time, but we go home and he starts researching it, and we're just talking about it. And I was like, yeah, I have retinitis pigmentosa.
I think it just speaks to, it's like, even experts can be wrong. Like the best in the world, like the greatest minds, they can be wrong. And that's just because they're human. And, misdiagnoses happen, and they happen quite routinely. We might not think they do, but it's truly amazing how many people go misdiagnosed. Because my friend, his name is Ryan Jones. He works for Vispero, which was formerly Freedom Scientific, the company that developed the JAWS program for screen readers. And he went his entire life being told that he had retinitis pigmentosa, and that's what they believed. And then it wasn't until like for yourself, like 20s, 30s, he actually found out that he had Leber's congenital amaurosis instead. And he was going to universities and being told by these doctors at these very renowned universities, like, no, you've got RP. No, he didn't. He had LCA. So it's just like, it happens so often. So it's crazy. It's just truly crazy.
So Chad, everyone's RP, looks very differently. So I'm curious to know today, what does retinitis pigmentosa look like for you?
Yeah, so obviously it's such a whirlwind conversation to talk to people who really have no understanding of what vision loss is. Obviously, I people can't see me, but I do wear glasses, and I get asked all the time, can you even see with those things on? And I'm like, yes, I can. I have quite good usable vision with my glasses on versus without my glasses on. So my usable vision, and this is the best way that I have found to describe it, especially nowadays, is imagine you have a coffee straw, like those little small little coffee straws that you stir your coffee with. Imagine taking that, holding it up to one of your eyes, closing one eye, and then looking through the coffee stir with your other eye open. That is my vision. That is my field of vision. I have less than 5 degrees of total vision. I have cataracts in both eyes. The one on my left eye makes it extremely hard to see with my both eyes open. There's days where I literally have to have my left eye closed because the cataract is so bad and just makes my field of vision just too hard to manage. Like I can't even see anything. On good days, I can see photos, I can read some text, but more often than not, it's so minuscule that I can't really see a lot. And I've gotten to the point, especially nowadays, where I really can't see the faces of my friends and family. I can see shapes. I can see light. I have light perception. So it's very complex to explain. I would say, it's just like a little pinpoint. It's like that coffee stir. But there are days where I have good days, and then there's days more often than not where it sometimes feels like, okay, a couple more days, give it a month or two, and then I won't have anything. But I don't care about that anymore. I have enough pride in my disability to think that if I do go blind, then nothing changes. I'm still the same person that I am. I still fight for the same things that I'm fighting for and have been fighting for a long time now. And it honestly, I believe that my disability has made me a better person and actually saved me from becoming a terrible person. So, yeah, I know that sounds weird to say, but for me, my disability is a good thing.
I think having a disability definitely gives you an entirely different perspective and outlook on life and makes you appreciate things more, makes you more creative and innovative in problem solving because you have to be more adaptable.
We're the best.
So definitely so many amazing qualities that come out of people who have to learn how to live in the quote unquote normal world as an abnormal person.
Yeah, that word normal, that was a demon for me when it comes to my mental health. That word plagued me for over 10 years and it nearly ended my life. So it's like it's the whole living to what society expects you or unconsciously expects you to live up to or try to measure your own self-worth to. And just, man, there was a point, I say my disability, I'm happy, but there was definitely a point where I hated being blind, where I hated losing my vision. And I wanted to get rid of it any way that I could, even if it meant harming myself.
So Chad, you mentioned at 15, 16 is when the first dip really happened for your vision. What was your mindset when that first happened and kind of how did that change your outlook at the time?
When it happened, obviously that's the age where kids start gaining independence. We get our permits, then we get our license. That means that we kind of, know, literally, I will say pun intended this time, keys to to freedom. We get these keys to cars that can take us places that growing up, we were like, oh, I'm going to go here when I'm a kid. I'm going to go on a road trip across the entire continent. Yeah, I'm going to go everywhere and anywhere, whenever I want. And you find out at 15, I find out at 15, it's like, no, you do not get to drive. In fact, you will never be able to drive. And that is what really affected me the most, is understanding just how much of visual disability can impact your independence. And I grew up in a what was at the time a very rural town. It's now quite overpopulated. But back in the day, there was really nothing there. Still really isn't in terms of the development. And to live in that town, you had to be able to drive, because there was no sidewalks, there was no ride share like we have today. They still don't even have a cab or bus system in that town that I grew up in. So how was I, supposed to go out into the world and feel like I can conquer the world when everything around me says no. You as a blind person, you sit at home, you wallow in self-loathing, and you do nothing. That's the feeling that I had growing up in my hometown. And it's just because there was just nothing there that would allow me to be independent and confident in my disability. And that's why for so long, I really thought, wow, the worst thing that could happen to me is to have this disability, to go blind. The best thing that could happen to me is if I could just be normal, if I could be like everybody else, like all my other classmates who are able to drive, walk outside in the dark and not hurt themselves, know what colors are, colors, that's not blue, that's green, or no, that's not green, that's blue. Or just be able to play sports, no longer being able to play basketball or see a soccer ball and kick it. I just started to lose a lot of faith in not only my existence, but the world around me, because I felt that I was being excluded and that there was no way for me to be included. And that's really what happened when that dip occurred. It really just shattered my understanding of the world. I thought there's no way that vision loss is going to change me in the way that I live my life. And I found out very harshly that day that it can dramatically change your life, and it can happen at the, drop of a pin. It's like again, there's no timeline for when your dips happen. You can go several years to a decade with nothing happening, especially with, recessive. It's so slow. Takes years and years for dips like that to happen sometimes. And that first dip took about 4 or 5 years. But I tell you what, when it dipped, and it really had a negative impact on my life.
As someone whose vision was the same pretty much from birth until today, being able to prepare myself for knowing that people were going to have other experiences and opportunities come up that I would not be able to participate in. You'd think that when I did turn 16 and all my schoolmates and friends were starting to get their licenses, that, I would have already been mentally prepared for that, quote unquote disappointment. But I wasn't still. I remember, sometimes crying and just feeling bad that why can't I get this experience? And, it was still really, really hard for me because I would not call it a rural area, but I was in a quite suburban area. Mm-hmm. And so I'd have to walk probably so my school was 3 miles away. So if I wanted to walk to school, that was 3 miles away. And then from there, maybe another mile away to get to the grocery store. And if you wanted to go to the mall or to the movies, that would take you all day to walk. So, I had to rely on other people to take me places. Mm-hmm. Mostly my mom. If she was okay with a friend that I had, I might be permitted to drive with them.
That sounds like my mom.
Yeah. So it was still really, really tough for me as well. And then, speaking of sports, I did try to participate in some. So I tried out swimming for a little bit because that's something you don't necessarily need to be able to see to do, but mm-hmm. found out very quickly that swimming was not for me. I, did track and field for a little bit, which I actually wish I had stuck with track and field because I feel like today I actually do enjoy running. Mm-hmm. And I have the advantage of being able to have my husband to run alongside me to make sure that I don't trip over one of those scooters that might be in the middle of the sidewalk. But
yeah.
So I wish I had stuck with that. But looking at other people who are participating in soccer or softball or volleyball and just seeing the community that gets created on sports mm-hmm. teams, I really felt left out. And just knowing that I would not be able to be part of that was really challenging for me. So my kind of solution to that was to get into theater. And so I started participating in plays and musicals, which is where I was able to find a little bit of a community. And it was something I enjoyed doing too. So I was really grateful to be able to find that outlet for me, but it was still very, very hard. So you, after high school, go to college. Where do you go to college?
I went to the University of West Florida, which is out of Pensacola, Florida. So it's about 45 minutes away from my hometown of Crestview, Florida. Great college. Um, Loved it. Uh, I, I, I think I should say I loved and hated it. I would definitely never trade the experience for anything, but there's so much that I would do different. Um, and I think really what made me hate it the most was just that, again, college was when I had another really big dip in my vision. And I also had to take a year off from college to get my mental health in check because I ended up really just struggling with my vision. And, I'll keep it there for now because I'm sure you have another answer you want to ask me. But yeah, UWF got my degree in history. Have never used it. But then again, I think that's commonplace for the society we live in today is we go to college and we don't ever use our degrees. But I always love getting to learn more things about the world, like learning to live on my own, learning how to clean for myself, how to cook for myself, and understand that if I wanted to move out from my parents, that I could do so. So I think that's the thing I enjoyed the most about college is kind of getting a sense of independence and confidence for the first time in my life.
Yeah, it's a great place to adult
Yeah.
with guardrails.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. Yeah.
You mentioned you go through kind of like a mental health downfall. I would like to go back a little bit. So when you think about yourself and your disability, you've mentioned to me that you had a negative disability identity. And so I'm curious to know from you, was that solely an internal struggle, or were there other external factors that really helped shape that negative disability identity?
I think really, if I think hard about it, I internalized it. I think it was solely internal. There was nothing external that was making me believe that. Like, there was definitely, I was definitely excelling. I was doing good in college. I was passing my classes. I was making the dean's list. I made the president's list one semester. So it's like I was succeeding. I could still walk on my own for the most part. Obviously, the longer I stayed in college, I transitioned to the cane and then eventually to my now retired guide dog. So there was nothing external that made me feel like, okay, I can't do this. But internally, and it's because I've always struggled with depression, social anxiety disorder, and OCD. So I have a lot of invisible disabilities that people probably don't even know because, I don't really talk about it as much as I do my vision. Obviously, it's a big one for me nowadays. But I just kept trying to measure my life to others. And I think that's really unhealthy, especially when it came to my disability. I was trying to live up to this unattainable image of normalcy. I thought that I had to be the person that society unconsciously said I had to be. And, that's the breadwinner. That's the buff macho male, and I say these things because these are the cliches. This is what, a lot of us, older adults now heard when we were young kids. Like, okay, especially for males, cisgender males, is you're supposed to go out, you're supposed to be successful, you're supposed to work 8-hour days, come home, yada, yada, yada. But it's just like, I couldn't do that. And when I thought, okay, well, why can't I do these things? Why can't I be this all-American boy that I believe that I should be? And when I kept thinking about it, the thing I always went back to was, it's because you're blind. It's because you're blind. It's because you're blind. And that's when I started to believe that, well, if it wasn't for my blindness, then I could be the normal all-American boy. that I could go out and drive, that I could become a doctor or an astronaut. I could do all these things that right now for me are unattainable and most likely will be unattainable for the rest of my life. It's because of my vision loss. And because of that way of thinking, I just kept letting it impact me more and more. And eventually there was just a year, I think it was my junior year of college, where it finally just became too much. I had just gotten into my own head to the point where I was basically just losing the battle with my own self-loathing. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my room. It had been about 2 months since I had been to my last college course, basically failing all of my classes. The only time I would get out of bed was to take a shower and eat, maybe go on the occasional walk outside just to stay, active. But I remember my friend called me. His name is Michael Davis. I love him to death because he did the right thing. And I always joke with him. I say, thank you for telling on me.
Hi there, this concludes part 1. Be sure to tune into part 2 next week to catch the second half of this incredible conversation. Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by yours truly, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Anton Blazov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraverage.org/contact for questions.